I am not going to talk very much. I'll just quickly introduce our three dietitians who you all probably know. We have Veronica, Samantha, and Fatim, and they are going to talk today about managing sodium intake for heart health. So I'm just going to hand it over to you guys, and I look forward to hearing what you have to say. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Okay, so you can go ahead to the next slide. Awesome. Yeah, so as Lisa mentioned, we are dietitians at the Cardiovascular Prevention Rehabilitation Program at Toronto Rehab Rumsey and Toronto Western sites. So my name is Samantha, and I'm joined today by Fatim and Veronica. We have a few objectives for today, and our main goals will be about understanding how much sodium we actually need for our bodies to function, recognizing the hidden food sources of sodium, and then learning how you can reduce sodium in your way of eating. So just a quick little background about what sodium is and what our needs are for the day. When we say sodium, I think most people usually will think of table salt, but there is an important difference between salt and sodium. So sodium is actually a part of table salt, and sodium is also found in naturally occurring in many different foods. So vegetables, meats, lots of different foods, and our bodies only need a very small amount of sodium each day to actually function and do its daily work. And the amount we need is about 500 milligrams per day. Now, that's the very bare minimum. We wouldn't recommend to actually try and get that low of a number, because you'd be, not getting enough of the other nutrients that you need in your diet. But just so that you know, it's not a lot of sodium that we actually need. A lot of people do worry about getting too little sodium. So for most people, that's not really a concern. The number that we all want to try and aim for, or adult Canadians really should be aiming for, is that second number on the slide. It's 1,500 milligrams of sodium per day. And that's equal to about 2/3 of a teaspoon of table salt, if you wanted to imagine actually measuring that out. And that's our goal. And then we see that last number there. So there's lots of numbers, but we don't want you to get too focused on them. The last number we have is the actual limit for the day, the maximum amount that we don't want to go over or exceed. And that is 2,300 milligrams per day. And that's equal to about 1 teaspoon of table salt. So really, you don't need to worry about adding all these numbers up, or, memorizing the numbers, or trying to, worry about adding up all the sodium in your diet. It's more important to be aware of the hidden sources of sodium in your diet and knowing where you're really getting sodium, so that you can make lower sodium choices throughout the day. And so now I'll just pass it over to Fatim to take us through the next few slides.
Thank you, Sam. So the next slide, when we think of sodium, we often think of that salt shaker. And oftentimes I will have people tell me, you know what, I don't add salt in my cooking, and I never use the salt shaker. And, that's a great step to take. But it's important to realize that the salt shaker, or the salt that we're adding to our foods, is only accounting for about 10 to 25%. So about a quarter of our intake or less. And I think it comes as a surprise to most people that the majority of our sodium or salt intake is actually coming from processed foods and restaurant foods. So these processed foods are things that come in packages. So you might think of things that come in a can or a bottle or a box, or restaurant foods, whether you're dining in or getting takeout, or even getting prepared foods from your grocery store. I think that's where the majority of the Canadian sodium intake is coming from. And just in terms of numbers as well, Samantha mentioned sort of the goal and the upper limit. In fact, though, the average Canadian is eating double what the recommended amount is. So, on average, most of us are easily getting around 3,000 milligrams of sodium per day. So let me give you some examples of how sodium can sneak in. So here we have some tomato products. So starting off with a fresh tomato, a medium-sized hothouse tomato will only give you about 14 milligrams of sodium. And that's just the natural sodium you find in most fruits and vegetables, a very small amount, not a big deal if we're, aiming for 1500. But let's say, tomatoes are quite expensive right now. You don't have fresh tomatoes on hand, and you open up a can of tomatoes. On average, half a cup of canned tomato will give you 292 milligrams of sodium. So you can see the big jump from that fresh tomato. If you go down the list, and if you were to have half a cup of tomato juice, you jump to 439 milligrams of sodium. Half a cup of pasta sauce. I know that's, an easy meal. I know I do it myself sometimes. You open up a jar or a can of pasta sauce, it's quick, but half a cup on average will give you a whopping 749 milligrams of sodium, or half your day's worth. And then down at the bottom, we have half a cup of ketchup at 1300 milligrams. Hopefully we're not using that much, but you can see that the more you process foods, the higher the sodium intake. And it's really there more for flavor rather than as a preservative in these foods. You really don't need that much sodium in pasta sauce or ketchup. It's just there because we love the taste of salt, and manufacturers, try to meet that taste by adding a ton of salt. So you can see, that processing adds a lot. Now, give you some other examples. So we will be showing you a video about restaurant foods, but just wanted to give you one quick example of a breakfast meal. So here you have, a couple of poached eggs, a couple of pieces of toast, some bacon, and some tomatoes. How much sodium do you think is in this meal? Maybe give it a minute to think about it. And while you're thinking, I think oftentimes we focus on the bacon, which absolutely is high in sodium, as are most processed or deli meats. In a restaurant, they've probably added sodium to the egg, but I think sometimes we forget the bread. And in fact, bread tends to be one of the biggest sources of hidden sodium in our diet. And if you've ever looked at your package of bread, you might notice anywhere from 200 to 400 milligrams per slice. So that adds up. So if we look at this one meal, there are, and Veronica, if you can pop up the next, over 1100 milligrams, or 76% of our sodium intake goal, just in this one meal at breakfast. So probably not something we can do often, but things to think about when we're eating out. Now, another example would be a bowl of soup. It's heart healthy to have all those veggies. It's something that we often will pick, whether we're eating at home or in a restaurant. But a typical cup of canned soup or restaurant soup will give you almost 1,000 milligrams of sodium. And that's without, the crackers on the side or the sandwich you might have with this. So, again, something to think about if you are buying canned soups or packaged soups. You might want to think about ways of reducing that sodium by maybe looking for a lower sodium or no salt added soup or broth, maybe adding your own fresh or frozen veggies or canned beans and making your own soup, which would end up being a lot lower in sodium than a pre-made soup. And then one more example. This one's pretty surprising to a lot of people, but here we have 2.5 dill pickles. Something you might enjoy on the side or part of a sandwich. How much sodium do you think is in 2.5 dill pickles? These 2.5 dill pickles give us our entire day's worth of sodium. And I think this is pretty surprising to a lot of people. It's sometimes the condiments, the sauces, the things we add to our foods that really add up in terms of our sodium intake. It doesn't mean you're never going to eat pickles, but you might look at the quantity and maybe have a few slices rather than 2.5 at one go. You might also look at food labels and look at the sodium content and look for lower sodium ones. And Veronica is going to go into that a little later in this presentation. But those were just a couple of examples. And now we're going to go to a video starring our own Sam that aired on Marketplace a couple of months ago. And this is all about some of the hidden sodium in the restaurant foods that we get in our chain restaurants in Canada.
Dinner is on us.
I'd like to order something for pickup, please.
But just how much sodium are these big chains delivering?
As a dietitian, I can be surprised with the amount of sodium that is found in some of these meals.
We've got some shockers.
That is mind-boggling.
You look very surprised.
That'll shake up your choices.
Honestly, that's astonishing.
Don't dine out until you watch your Marketplace.
Okay, milestones. I'd like to order something for pickup, please. Got the Caesar salad. I'd like to order the spinach and artichoke dip, please. Chicken fajitas.
Thank you for calling Joey Restaurant.
The vegan hunan kung pao. Mediterranean bowl looks good. Here to pick up the spinach and artichoke dip.
We're putting takeout to the test at popular sit-down chain restaurants.
Hi, Dexter. How can I help you?
Jack Astor's, Boston Pizza, Earl's, Kelsey's Original Roadhouse, Joey Restaurants, and Milestones. We're mostly ordering healthy sounding options to try and stick to our New Year's resolutions.
Plant-based menu. Mediterranean bowl, order placed.
But we want to know, is there more sodium in these foods than you might think? To find out, we're heading to the University Health Network's cardiac rehab program in Toronto to meet two heart heroes, registered dietitian Samantha and Dr. Paul O.
Perfect blood pressure, very nice.
He's the medical director of UHN's cardiovascular prevention and rehab program.
How are you?
Samantha, good. How are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
Good to see you.
They know the impact too much sodium can have on our health.
There can be a large amount of sodium in some of those takeout meals.
And you're a dietitian. You know all about this stuff. But how hard is it for someone even like you when it comes to watching sodium?
Honestly, it is very challenging. I can be surprised with the amount of sodium that is found in some of these meals.
When you say sodium, I think salt. What's the difference?
So sodium will be found in different foods, not just salt. People will often say, oh, don't add any salt to my meal, thinking that's going to reduce the sodium. But majority of it has already been added in the seasonings, the marinades, foods that have been prepared ahead of time before you even get to the restaurants.
And that makes it hard to avoid if it's added in before the fact.
Absolutely.
Dr. O and Samantha say we all need to limit our sodium intake.
Excess sodium has been linked to a number of health problems. Cardiovascular would be our realm particularly. So too much salt equals elevations in blood pressure. High blood pressure is associated, of course, with risk of stroke, risk of heart attack. So sounds simple, little innocent white, little powder, but can have dire health consequences if we take too much.
So how much is too much? Health Canada says we should aim for about 1,500 milligrams of sodium a day. The daily max, 2,300 milligrams. So how do restaurant meals measure up? All of the restaurants we ordered from have their nutrition info on their websites. So we're checking it out to see how much sodium they say these items have.
How can I help you?
Hi there. I'd like to order the spinach and artichoke dip, please.
First up, an appetizer. The spinach and artichoke dip from Boston Pizza. It's our sodium shock number one.
I think a lot of people would see that there are some vegetables listed in the name and think, hey, this is a lower sodium option. But when we look at it, there's actually quite a bit of sodium coming from the cheese and other ingredients here.
And it's not just the dip.
There's going to be sodium in the actual pizza bread itself.
This appetizer has 2,520 milligrams of sodium. Boston Pizza says it serves 3 people, so that's 840 milligrams of sodium per person.
It's about a third of all the sodium you should be having for the entire day, the actual limit.
what does that much sodium translate to in salt?
Let's see what that looks like in terms of salt packs.
Yeah, seeing it in terms of salt is kind of an easier way to understand sodium and all the different milligrams that we're talking about.
Yeah.
These salt packets are about half a gram each.
So this is 4, give or take.
Yep.
The amount of sodium in one serving of this appetizer is the equivalent of about 4 packets of salt.
That is shocking.
It's a lot.
Do you think people realize just the appetizers?
I don't think so. I think especially, breads, those are often a surprise for people. A big contributor of sodium, but also the small little dip can definitely pack a punch.
We reached out to Boston Pizza for comment, but didn't hear back. Samantha's lower sodium suggestion at Boston Pizza? Get a slice of garlic toast instead.
It's still not necessarily a low sodium choice as 330 milligrams of sodium, but because you're just having the one slice, you're able to reduce that sodium intake.
Time for sodium shock number 2. We picked up a roasted garlic Caesar salad entree from Milestones.
You want to wager a guess? How much sodium are we talking about in this dish?
It's the company that the lettuce is keeping that's the problem here.
A problem if you're watching your sodium. Milestone's roasted garlic Caesar salad has 1,590 milligrams of sodium. That's about 2/3 of the daily recommended max.
Doesn't leave room for other meals, that's for sure.
Let's see what that much sodium translates to in packets of salt. The sodium in the salad is equal to about 8 packets of salt.
So that's really surprising. Salad by itself doesn't necessarily mean healthy.
So what can you do to slash the sodium?
Maybe see if you could leave the croutons and the bacon off on the side and the dressing, and then just sprinkle a small amount.
Milestones tells us their Caesar salad is as traditional as it comes, but they're always looking to reduce sodium where possible. And they're working on a slight reformulation of this dressing, along with a couple of other sauces. Our next stop, Joey Restaurants. Their Mediterranean bowl is our sodium shock number 3.
I think that the word Mediterranean may have a bit of a health halo around it. Of course, the Mediterranean diet itself does have great heart health benefits. And we see there are, some great fiber-rich options in there, like the chickpeas, and there's some chicken. But unfortunately, there are some sneaky sources of sodium in there. Whenever you see the word marinade, smoked, pickled, or seasoning, you want to think sodium.
The Mediterranean bowl from Joey has 2,530 milligrams of sodium. That's more than the daily recommended max in just one dish.
That's one dish, your entire kind of upper limit. So this is too much. I guess it should be something that should be shared. If one was going to dive into something that has this much color, texture, flavor, and sodium.
Let's see what that much sodium translates to in salt.
Wow, to the packets.
Yes, to the packets we go. I feel like I'm going to be here all day.
Yeah. Wow, that's so much.
Wow.
The sodium in the Mediterranean bowl is equal to about 12.5 packets of salt.
Most people would not imagine putting that much salt into just one serving.
We're heading to the Hamilton Farmers Market to ask shoppers what they think of this sodium surprise.
I like salt. No salt, no fat, no flavor. That's my motto.
When you think of Mediterranean diet, do you think healthy? What do you think?
Yeah, I think healthy. Yeah, I think it's very healthy.
If I saw it on a menu, I would not assume that it was high in sodium.
So this particular dish has more than 2,500 milligrams of sodium.
Oh, wow.
So above the daily max.
That does really surprise me.
It's definitely surprising.
It's a lot.
Samantha says this substitution at Joey shrinks the sodium.
The crispy tofu bowl, that's 1,330 milligrams of sodium. Definitely a lot lower than this particular dish.
We reached out to Joey Restaurants for a comment, but we didn't get a response. Our sodium shockers take us to New York City, where consumers get a warning.
Red Lobster dishes here. Let's take a look.
Chain restaurants are required to put a warning icon on menu items that have 2,300 milligrams of sodium or more.
Warning,
Warning above it. Another one, another one, another one.
And a message that explains the potential health risks of high sodium diets.
Can increase blood pressure, the risk of heart disease, stroke.
The policy applies to chain restaurants with 15 or more locations.
That's got a sodium warning sign.
Check out this menu. Olive Garden. Oh yeah, you can see the warnings.
We're heading to the New York City Health Department to find out more about why they started the policy. Amaka Anekwe is the Director of Strategic Nutrition Initiatives here.
When you walk into a chain restaurant, you may not be able to tell exactly how much sodium is in the product. For example, you may have two very similar sounding items, let's say 2 turkey sandwiches, and they may have dramatically different amounts of sodium.
Amaka says from the start, consumers were in support of these labels, but restaurants, not so much at first.
There was a legal challenge brought by the National Restaurant Association. Ultimately, the policy prevailed, and we were happy to see the policy go into place.
Restaurants might say that the amount of sodium is on their website, that they don't need it on the menus.
It's really hard to imagine someone taking that extra step in time to look for that nutrition information. What's really great for consumers is if when they're standing at the menu board, they can see that information immediately and make their decision right on the spot.
Early research suggests consumer behavior may be changing as a result of the warning icon.
We have preliminary evidence that shows that consumer purchases at sit-down restaurants have less sodium.
That's good news for New York.
That's great news for our consumers.
Does Canada need something like this, Samantha?
I think that would be very helpful. It's very clear to indicate, hey, this is a high sodium food, beware, and then somebody can choose another option on the menu that isn't higher in sodium and doesn't contain that label.
Coming up, more sodium shockers.
In just 1 tablespoon of soy sauce, you can have almost 1,000 milligrams of sodium.
And our biggest reveal yet.
14, 16.
This is your marketplace. We're putting popular sit-down chain restaurants to the test and revealing some sodium shockers. Next up, how about something from a plant-based menu? Earl's Vegan Hunan Kung Pao is our sodium shock number 4.
People associate vegan foods with having nutrition benefits, and the vegan diet is a great diet choice, but oftentimes we do need to be careful because there can still be a lot of sodium in the dish.
Earl's initially tells us their vegan Hunan Kung Pao has 3,110 milligrams of sodium. That's more than the daily recommended maximum.
That is mind-boggling.
Let's see what that much sodium looks like in packets of salt.
We're going to be here a while.
Wow.
5, not even close. My gosh.
This plant-based dish has the equivalent sodium of about 15.5 packets of salt.
There's a ginger soy sauce that they're using, so that's going to be one of the key contributors of sodium here. And just 1 tablespoon of soy sauce, you can have almost 1,000 milligrams of sodium, so it can really add up.
Earl's tells us after hearing from Marketplace, they made updates to the dish and lowered the sodium to 2,850 milligrams. That's still over the daily recommended max. They also tell us they provide a variety of menu options, from healthy to more indulgent. And like all of the other restaurants we visited, they have complete nutritional info on their website. Here's Samantha's lower sodium suggestion at Earl's.
There's the vegan spring greens and grain salad, and that one comes in at just 600 milligrams of sodium for the dish. So that's a big savings in terms of the sodium content.
Time for the biggest sodium shocker on our takeout spree.
Kelsey's Original Roadhouse. Here we go. Chicken fajitas.
Kelsey's chicken fajitas, our sodium shock number 5.
I think a lot of times people would be choosing this type of dish because they see lots of chicken, they see vegetables, and that's often something we're encouraging people to eat more of. But unfortunately, there is quite a bit of sources of sodium in this particular dish.
How much sodium? Wait for it. 4,340 milligrams. That's nearly double the daily recommended max.
All together with 4,000 milligrams plus, that's too much for anybody.
So immediately what jumps out to me is the multiple tortillas. Each one of those are going to be a sneaky source of sodium. Just one tortilla can have 200 to 300 milligrams of sodium in it.
I find that surprising because they don't taste salty.
Exactly, yeah. So that is that hidden source of sodium that we talk about. It doesn't jump out at you, but it does add a lot of sodium into the diet.
What does that much sodium equal in salt packets?
This is going to be a team effort for this one.
Salt packet party here.
This dish has the equivalent sodium of just over 22 packets of salt.
Yeah, that's
Look at that.
a lot.
We would never use this much salt on purpose, right?
Back at the Hamilton Farmers Market, what do shoppers think?
That's a lot of sodium for one day.
Honestly, that's astonishing.
That's crazy. Then again, if I owned a restaurant, I'd say they ain't going to eat it unless I salt it down like this because it won't taste as good.
We reached out to Kelsey's, but didn't hear back. Samantha's lower sodium substitution at Kelsey's has about a quarter of the sodium.
The Kelsey's grilled chicken breast burger with a side of steamed veggies. And so if you're looking for a chicken alternative, you might be surprised that that's actually going to be a lower sodium choice, a burger.
Restaurant foods are one of the big sources of sodium in our diet, along with prepackaged or highly processed foods.
Sodium is on Health Canada's radar. They're going to require these high sodium warning labels on the front of prepackaged foods. You'll be seeing them on grocery store shelves, but not on restaurant menus. We ask why, but they decline our request for an interview, saying nutritional information is only required on prepackaged foods, but say they are watching to see what happens with the sodium warning labels in New York. Is Health Canada falling short in this?
I would love to see more information available in the restaurants. And if people are used to seeing it in the grocery stores, then I think they'll start to expect it from the restaurants as well.
What would you like to see as a heart doctor?
Being able to go out is a joy in life. To be social, to be with friends, to dine out, I think is something that we've missed so much and we really want to enjoy going forward. But for us to navigate this safely for individuals, then having more information available to us would be great.
A birthday surprise is next on the menu, but who invited sodium to the celebration? This is your marketplace.
There we go, check out.
We're testing sodium levels in your takeout. There are sodium surprises in every menu item we buy.
Here's the birthday cake. Let's get one of these.
And now we hope you save room for dessert. Jack Astor's has our sodium shock number 6. Birthday cake?
So cake. Why are we talking about sodium when we're looking at something so sweet?
Yeah, I think this is another one of those sneaky sources of sodium.
This dessert has 956 milligrams of sodium. Jack Astor says it serves 2 people, meaning each serving has 478 milligrams of sodium, about 20% of the daily recommended limit.
This one's a real surprise. It looks almost like the size of a large muffin.
This is bursting my bubble. First, the bread that I love, now the desserts, which is my favorite part of a meal.
People don't realize that there's sodium in things like baking soda and baking powder, but also salt is used as a flavor enhancer and preservative. These are some of the reasons why it can be high in sodium.
What if it is your birthday, though?
I don't think there's anything wrong with indulging every now and then. So if it's your birthday, enjoy it.
Or Samantha says this sweet treat is a lower sodium option at Jack Astor's.
This restaurant has a option called the world's most ridiculously small brownie. It's just a tiny little serving, but that comes in at just 67 milligrams of sodium. So only 3% of your day's worth of sodium. It's not that we need to be afraid of the sodium and eating out, but knowing where to look.
And be aware of those hidden sources.
Yes, the hidden sources, that's where they get you for sure.
But what if you want to lower the sodium when you're eating at home and still have flavorful food? We're meeting this culinary couple to get some tasty tips.
Hey, Michael.
Hi, Rosa.
Thank you for having us over.
Nice to see you.
Good to
Come
see
on
you.
in the kitchen.
Thank you.
The challenge is we want to eat healthier,
but we also want food to taste good.
Chef Anna Olson is a TV host on the Food Network Canada.
Welcome to the Great Chocolate Showdown finale.
And a cookbook author. Michael Olson is a chef and educator at the Niagara College School of Culinary Arts.
And how is the smoked flavor?
So good. Smells so good too.
Great.
I'm going to get these onions cooking, and we're going to fill the kitchen with aromas. It's a combination of the aroma and the taste together. Over the last year, I have family members that have had to completely change their diet because of kidney disease. And so it has been a firsthand lesson. I lean towards lemon, most of all when I'm cooking, when I'm pulling the salt out of it.
That's sodium swap number 1. Add citrus.
I'm going to add zest to the pan just because it does.
You see, that's something I never would have thought of.
Sodium swap number 2. Add texture.
I'm a big fan of crunch. So something like toasted sesame, toasted peanuts, breadcrumbs, toasted almonds, something like that, that adds that little bit of excitement. It elevates the food similarly to salt.
Sodium swap number 3. Add spices or herbs.
I'm adding a garam masala. So a combination of spices or using fresh herbs is also a great way to build in the flavor so you don't miss the salt.
And finally, sodium swap number 4. Add some heat.
I love the flavor of fresh chilies. I think I've probably got a higher heat tolerance than Anna, but it wakes your food up.
It smells great already.
Flavor boosters without the sodium. Bon appetit.
Great. So I hope you found that entertaining and educational. So we went over, how much sodium we need, and then we discussed where sodium is in our diets. So now let's talk about what can we do to manage our sodium intake. Now a lot of this was covered in that great segment with Samantha there, but I'm just going to review it and summarize it here. We want to try to read the menu to know how foods are prepared. So things that are cooked in sauces, marinades, gravies, dressings are often high in sodium. Not saying that you can't have these, but maybe if you could ask for the sauces or dressings on the side, that way you can add a lower amount of sodium to the dish. Also, salad dressings are one of those hidden sources of sodium as well. So a common suggestion that I have for individuals is to just ask for the olive oil and balsamic vinegar to be delivered to your table, and you can make your own dressing there. You could even ask for some lemon too, like Anna had mentioned in the segment, to make it a little bit more flavorful. You also want to be wary of the healthy options, as discussed, that Mediterranean bowl. We all know that the Mediterranean way of eating is so heart healthy, but not necessarily with that amount of sodium. So just because it says Mediterranean, really look to see what is in the dish. You can always make requests. So talking with your waiter or waitress about saying that you're on a low sodium diet and asking if they have anything that they could recommend that's lower in sodium, or perhaps the chef could make something depending on the restaurant. Maybe they just don't add that extra dash of salt at the end, right? It's important to speak to them, to let them know they're there to make you happy. So they're often very accommodating, and I'm sure that they've heard this request before. Watching our serving sizes. So we know restaurant meals are larger serving sizes than what we usually portion ourselves for dinner or meals in general. So watching how much you're eating is always important. The more we eat, the more sodium we're going to eat. A trick that a lot of my clients enjoy or have said that they've used and they like is that when you're ordering off the menu is to actually ask for half of it to be delivered to your table and then half of it to be wrapped up. So that's even before the food comes to your table. That way, when the food comes, you don't have to be on high alert to only eat a certain portion and then save an extra portion to be wrapped up to take home at the end. This way, it's already done. You don't have to worry about it. And then you have a meal for the next day.
And then we do know now that nutrition information is available online, or if you haven't had the chance to look online, you can ask for the nutrition information when you're at the chain restaurant. They should have it on file for you, and they should be able to deliver it to your table. This does take an extra step to look up before you go to the restaurant, but I would suggest spending those few minutes to find a low sodium choice. And that way, when you're at the restaurant, you don't have to worry about scanning the menu and trying to find and navigate a low sodium option. Now, how else can we eat low sodium? Reading food labels is extremely important. So a few places on the food label you can you look to see if the product is lower in sodium. The first one is something called health claims, nutrition health claims. They're usually found on the front of package, and the ones we want to look for are bolded here. So no salt added or low sodium. The chicken broth here, you can see has low sodium right on the front of the package, and low sodium means that there is 140 milligrams of sodium or less per serving. So that's indicating it's a low sodium choice. And then the peas here, if you can see in the blue, it has the claim no salt added. And that means that there has been no salt added to the product. When you look at the ingredient list of the product, there shouldn't be any salt listed there, and so that they can put a health claim there. Unfortunately, there are some other health claims that could be a little bit more misleading. One is, 50% less sodium, and that means 50% less sodium than the original product. So it is lower in sodium than the original product, but doesn't mean that it is a low sodium option. If the regular, version of the product had about 5,000 milligrams of sodium, you cut that in half to 50%, and that's 2,500 milligrams of sodium, and they could still put that health claim on the front of package, looking like it is a low sodium option, but it is still over your upper limit for the day. So if you find these claims confusing, that's when I would say just turn over the package and look at the nutrition facts table or the ingredient list, because it does offer a lot more specific information about the product. Nutrition facts table, you can look at the serving size and then directly at the sodium amount. You can go to the percent daily value, and we're looking for a percent daily value of 5% or less. That would indicate a low sodium option. And then in the ingredient list, you can tell if salt has been added to the product. If you see words like sodium or salt, those would mean that salt has been added and it's not just the naturally occurring sodium that you would be eating. What else can we do? Samantha talked a lot about hidden sources of sodium, or those sneaky sources, in our breads and our baked items. So keeping an eye out for those. And then if you are buying canned items, I know I do, I always rinse my beans, my tuna, my salmon, to make sure that I'm rinsing off any extra sodium that I can. And you give it a good rinse. I always say try to rinse it until the bubbles are gone, and so it takes a good 10-15 seconds, but it ensures that it's a good rinse and the sodium can be reduced that way. And when we reduce the sodium, we reduce the flavor, and you can see that too with the gentleman in the CBC Marketplace interview saying that salt is flavor. And I don't disagree with him, but we can replace the flavor with herbs and spices. And I think that's an important thing to try out. So before you salt anything, I think it's important to go ahead and taste that before you salt it. It's sometimes habit to add that extra little bit of salt when we may not even need it. Our taste buds are happy with the dish as is. And then cooking with herbs and spices, maybe citrus as well. There's a lot of great herbs and spices pre-mixes that are salt-free blends that you can purchase. Up here on the screen, we have Mrs. Dash is a common brand, and McCormick's salt-free blend. They're both available in most grocery stores. McCormick's has a regular blend as well, so you want to make sure that on the ingredient list, when you flip it over, there's no added salt there. Or you can look for that salt-free claim as well. So those would be two I recommend. At the bottom, there's a picture of a line called David's Condiments. I don't see it in stores as much as I used to, but you can still order that online, and I do recommend it. He has some great blends full of flavor. So try that, or you can simply make that yourself at home and store it in a little mason jar and add it as you need. One thing we recommend is to avoid salt substitutes. So I don't know if you've aware that there are salt substitutes. When you go into the aisle in the grocery store, when there are salts there, you may see something called no salt, half salt. Those are salt substitutes. And what they've done is, Samantha had talked about salt. So salt is two molecules, sodium and chloride together. And when you're looking at the salt substitute, they have potassium and chloride together. So they simply replace the sodium molecule with the potassium molecule. And sometimes when we have too much potassium in the form of a supplement, it can interact with some heart medications. And that's why we simply just suggest avoiding it. I also don't think that they taste that great as well. They have a little bit of a metallic aftertaste. So I would encourage the herbs and spices instead. And then here's a little activity about a food label, just showing you where to look on the food label to make sure that your choice is low in sodium. So this is a canned salmon, and you can see in blue there, it has the health claim on the front of package that says low sodium. So we then flip to the serving size, which is a half a can. And then we can look right at the sodium, which is highlighted, and it says about 4% of our daily value of sodium is in this half a can of salmon, which is a low sodium option. So that's fantastic. And then we can also look at the ingredient list. It only has one ingredient listed, and that is salmon. So those are areas to look to indicate if it is low in sodium. And then if we compare it actually to the regular canned salmon, you can see there's no health claim on the front of this package. The serving size is the same at half a can, but the sodium has drastically increased. So it's increased from 4% of our daily value to 18% of our daily value. And if you look at the difference too with the ingredients, it only has two ingredients there, but it has salmon and salt. So all you see is that they've added salt to this, and they've added a lot of salt, and it is no longer a low sodium option. So hopefully that helps to clarify where to look on the food label and the difference between some regular products and lower sodium options. So to wrap up, I just want you to take a minute to reflect on what you're doing now. And this is just more of an awareness activity to maybe form a goal to reduce your sodium intake for your heart health. So thinking about, are you relying on frozen or prepared foods, such as frozen entrees, instant side dishes, for most of your meals? And if so, what could you do about it? Maybe your goal is to look at food labels more when you're at the grocery store and choose a low sodium option. So just because you're doing it now doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It's, like I said, awareness and trying to form a goal to improve our heart health. Thinking about how many restaurant meals we are eating, and that doesn't mean just going out to eat. Ordering in can still be a restaurant meal that you saw is very likely to be high in sodium. And even, going for your morning coffee and picking up something in the drive-thru is also considered a restaurant meal. So think about those times, and is there a chance that you could make that meal at home instead? How about those processed meats from the deli? Fatim had mentioned that bacon's high in sodium, but also these deli meats. Maybe if you're eating the processed meats, you could switch the processed meats to that low sodium canned salmon that we saw. And we know that eating more salmon is great for our heart health. So that would be a really good switch. And then maybe you just didn't know about these health claims that say no salt added or low sodium. And that's where you want to target your energy going forward. And you're just going to look for those in the grocery store going forward. So hopefully this kind of triggers something that you can start to do a little bit differently when you are grocery shopping or cooking your meals. And then the take-home message is to eat at home more often. It doesn't mean that you can't eat out or at restaurant meals. And it's just about, trying to eat at home most often. And then if you do go out to eat, navigating that menu with all of the tips and tricks that you've heard today. So I think now we have some time for questions and answers. So if you have any questions, feel free to write it in the Q&A box and we will answer your questions.
I have one.
Yeah.
I'll kick things off. So like Veronica said, if you do have any questions, please feel free to type them in the Q&A and we will read them out loud, and then the ladies will answer them. I'm curious if there is a healthier form of salt, and what I mean is it healthier to use sea salt or Himalayan salt as opposed to iodized table salt or something like that? Like, are there healthier versions of salt that you can use, or is salt salt?
Maybe I'll take a stab at that, Lisa. So I think salt is salt. At the end of the day, whether you take table salt or sea salt or kosher salt or pink salt, the sodium content per teaspoon is very similar. And as Samantha mentioned, it's about 2,300 milligrams of sodium per teaspoon. That being said, some people prefer a certain type of salt, and that's okay. It's a personal preference. But in terms of the amount of sodium in a teaspoon, they're all pretty close.
Thank you. I'm seeing just a comment here about bread, and I'll say, me personally, I was, shocked a number of years ago when I kind of realized how much salt is in bread. And, this person here is saying, shocked to see Rudolph's multigrain sourdough bread has over 1,500 milligrams of sodium in one slice. Do any of you have any further comment with relation to bread and the sodium content in that?
I can comment on that. And actually, I took a quick look to check to see how much sodium is in, because I was like, wow, that seems like a huge number there. And you're right, sodium in bread is one of those kind of shockers. And I've had a lot of patients in our group education kind of mention they were looking at a label and the bread is the one that stands out. I think that might be a typo. So there's actually 500 milligrams per 2 slices, I think. So it's a little less, but still a lot, 500 milligrams, thinking about our goal being 1,500. So I think that's not uncommon. You can find lower sodium breads, but it is one of those big contributors for sure. And I think because it's kind of a staple of a lot of people's diets, and usually we have 2 slices, that is where it kind of starts to add up. If you have, some for breakfast and again at lunch, or if you add it on the side of your soup or any other kind of entree. So yeah, it definitely is a shocker. But there are some lower sodium options out there. So, and even between different brands, bread can really vary. So I'd say look at the label and you can definitely find some lower sodium options than the 500 for the 2 slices, definitely.
Yeah, thank you. So I have someone here asking, are there blood tests that can tell you your sodium level?
Yeah, that's a great question. There is a blood test that, assesses how much sodium is in your blood, but it's not really a good indicator of your salt intake. So our body does a really great job at regulating the sodium in our blood. And so if we are eating too much sodium, what will happen is our body will kind of dilute that sodium to keep it within a range that works for our body and its functioning. So I guess as a result of that, that's when your blood pressure would go up. Usually that has more strain on your vessels, and because you have a larger volume of blood, trying to reduce all of that sodium or dilute the sodium, I should say, to make sure that that sodium level in our blood remains something that our body is happy with. So yes, there is a blood test, but it's not a great indicator of sodium intake.
So kind of 2 follow-up questions here from other people that maybe fit along nicely with this is, how long does it take for your body to use the salt that you intake? And then the other one would be, how can you tell if you're having too much sodium? And they asked this in the context of blood work, but maybe that and other ways.
Yeah, so I can continue, I guess. So I guess you can tell if you have too much sodium is a lot of the time you feel thirsty. And again, that's our bodies kind of taking all the water and trying to dilute the sodium and then making us, our thirst sensations, asking us to drink more and try to dilute that sodium a little bit more. So I think that would be the number one kind of sign that you may have too much sodium. I don't know if anyone else has anything to contribute there.
I definitely agree. Like, I think, the feeling really thirsty, kind of feeling maybe a little puffy too. And the increase maybe in blood pressure for some people that can be more pronounced. And I think, as far as how long it takes for our body to kind of use up that salt, I think that's kind of a tricky question. Everyone's going to be a little different. Our losses might be different, how much you lose through sweat or we lose through our urine or bowel movements. So I think that's going to be a little tricky, but if we're aiming for that daily goal of 1500 and staying below 23, that's what research has really shown to be the most optimal for our health, to try and reduce those negative effects. So I think it's a tricky question and might be a little bit kind of individually specific, but I think
so those values, the 1500, 2300 are thought to be within a single day.
Yes.
Like a 24-ish hour period or so. Yeah. Okay. What health problems, can you just review what health problems are linked to having excess sodium?
Okay, so I think Dr. O mentioned it in the video, and Veronica touched upon it as well. We do know that there's a link between a high sodium intake and high blood pressure or hypertension. So, if you eat a lot of salt, your blood pressure tends to be higher. But we also know that the research shows that regardless of your blood pressure, a higher sodium intake is also linked with a higher incidence of heart disease and stroke. So that's something to keep in mind. And there are links also between a higher sodium intake and certain types of kidney issues and even stomach cancer. So a lot of good reasons to cut back on our salt intake.
Great, thank you. Question here about, do you have any suggestions for recipes for different marinades, like the ones you showed at the store example, David's brands, etc., or maybe guidance on where they might be able to find some recipes and other resources?
Yeah, that's a good question. We do have some recipes on our website, cardiaccollege.ca, that are low in sodium. I would say there's a great website called Cookspiration that I would direct you to as well, that has low sodium options. Even Googling low salt food or low sodium, recipe that you're looking for does pull up a lot of great options. And a lot of the articles do, have those nutrition facts as well at the very bottom of the recipe. So now that you know how to look for it, you can still look for the sodium amount, or you can even scan the ingredient list. And if salt, is one of the ingredients, maybe pass on that recipe and look for another one. But Google is a great database. So I would, encourage that, but do so with a grain of salt and really look at the ingredients as well as the nutrition facts if you can.
Pun intended there. Yeah. Is it sodium that causes people's ankles to swell?
So that can be one potential cause. Like, I think that if you notice your ankle swelling, definitely important to talk to your medical team and your doctor. Could be, a sign of one thing being, fluid retention with the too much salt in the diet. But, there's probably a variety of reasons why your ankles could swell. It'd be always a really good idea to chat with your doctor. But we know that for some of our patients that have certain heart issues, like, heart failure, for example, that could be one of those, first signs sometimes, or one of the signs that they're getting too much salt or fluid in the diet. So always good to be on the watch for that.
So I think this one's a bit of a continuation of my original question, which was around different types of salt and the different sodium levels within those. And I think, Fatim, maybe you said it well, but maybe we can just reiterate it, is just around levels of sodium within different types of salt. And, if it's wiser to use certain kinds or ones that maybe claim to be lower sodium salts, pink Himalayan or whatever, or is it just best to use whatever you like and just be conscious of the amount?
Yeah, I think what you said it, Lisa, is that, pick the one you like, but, take a look at the label. There might be a small variation, but not a huge difference, and pick what you like. Another thing, just to add on to what Veronica said, a lot of times in your own recipes, if it calls for a teaspoon of salt, you can probably cut back by a good amount, or use those herb and spice blends that Veronica mentioned as well. So you might think about maybe cutting the salt in half and then using Mrs. Dash or a McCormick spice blend to add the flavor. And then your taste buds actually, get used to eating less salt, and then you actually end up not enjoying salty foods anymore. I think that's a plus over time.
All right, well, it is 1 o'clock, so we have reached the end of our session for today. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank everybody for joining us today. We appreciate you taking the time out of your day. Thank you so much to Veronica, Samantha, and Fatim for this very informative session today. Thank you all very much and have a wonderful afternoon.